Welcome back to Passion here, and today I'll be analyzing the first half of Alpine's 2026 F1 season. So first I want to take a look at their qualifying pace through the first 11 races of the year, looking at their average pole gap as a 3-race rolling average. For Alpine, they've been much better than 2025, that's for sure. 2025, of course, they were generally the slowest team for most of the season. But this year, things started out pretty well, and for the first quarter of the season, they were at the front of the midfield, and they were, for some races, actually challenging the leading 4 teams. Unfortunately for them, things have kind of taken a bit of a step back gradually in the races since then, and they've now at a point where they're no longer competing towards the front of the midfield. Q3 is a bit beyond their reach, and they're now at a point where regular points races are a little bit too much for them to ask, and basically getting a 9th place there and 10th place here once in a while has been what they've been doing the last 3-4 races of the season. But taking a closer look at their qualifying pace, worst race in terms of 3-race rolling average is actually the first race of the season, Australia, 1.98 seconds off pole. Of course, that's a sample size of 1, so perhaps just an off race in Australia. And then things gradually improved to their best point, Miami, where they were about 0.9 of a second off pole and actually very close to Red Bull, who were 4th at the time. But since Miami, things have kind of gone backwards. They've lost about 0.7 of a second in terms of performance relative to pole position, and they've been passed both by Racing Bulls and most recently by Audi. Of course, upcoming races, I don't really expect, after the summer break, I don't really expect Williams or Haas to really challenge Alpine, but I think Aston Martin could be a real thorn in Alpine's side with the engine improvement that we should see from Honda at the next race of the season, that's the Dutch Grand Prix. So for Alpine, of course, big step forward with the switch from Renault power unit to Mercedes power unit for 2026, and with Mercedes power units being considered to be the class of the field, it is obviously a bit expected that they would have a big jump up from their performance last year. But that being said, the fact that they've tailed off as other teams have ramped up development suggests that some of their upgrades perhaps aren't working as expected, and there's more issues on the chassis side than maybe Alpine would have liked to admit. And that, goes back not just this year, but includes previous years when they were a works team. Now, taking a look at their 2 drivers and their head-to-head stats, it's been pretty one-sided. Gasly clearly stronger than Colapinto. Qualifying head-to-head, Gasly leads there 8-3, with a median qualifying gap of just over 0.2 of a second. Average starting position for Gasly 11.09, Colapinto 13.36. So a difference of just over 2 positions, very different from the Haas fight, where qualifying margin was very similar, but the difference in starting position was only half a position. So interesting how you can have the qual margin be very similar, but then have very different outcomes in terms of average starting position. Average finishing position for Gasly, again, he leads there, 8.70, for Colapinto, 11.45. And for Gasly, he is improving by about 2 positions from his starting position, but for Colapinto, he's doing a little bit less than that number. So Gasly is making up more ground in races, despite the fact that he is starting over 2 positions ahead of Colapinto. Next, when we look at race head-to-head, Gasly leads there by roughly similar margin, 7 head-to-head victories for him, 3 for Colapinto in races where both drivers have finished. But interestingly enough, if you would have removed the first 3 races of the season, where Colapinto's had the biggest performance deficit to Gasly, I guess took a little bit longer to get up to speed, and you looked at just the next 8 races, it would be 4-3 in terms of race head-to-head. So it has been a little bit closer recently, but still I would say Gasly's been the stronger of the 2. Points, 42 for Gasly, Colapinto has 19. Of course, Gasly got that podium at the Monaco Grand Prix, and that would have accounted for just over a third of his points tally for the whole year. So it does make things look a little bit bigger than the gap I think probably truly is. But that being said, I think Gasly's been definitely the better of the 2, and they're locked right now in a pretty close fight. In terms of Drivers' Championship with Racing Bulls, I believe Racing Bulls have 1 more point than they do. And again, in the Drivers' Championship fight, it's very, very close. I think Lawson's in 9th, Gasly's 10th, Lindblad is 11th, and then Colapinto is 12th. So very close there, but right now, Racing Bulls definitely look like the stronger team. So the 2 drivers, I think, are a little bit at risk of falling down the pecking order in the Drivers' Championship. But that being said, the 2 drivers who I'd say be most likely to pass them in Bortolato and Hülkenberg have quite a ways to go to get anywhere near, for example, Colapinto's 19 points. Now, taking a look at the two drivers individually and looking at my advanced stats, for Gasly, it's a bit of an interesting picture. Quality rating positive 0.089, which ranks 16th, so a little bit below average. And the reason why that is, despite the fact that he's clearly been the better driver in qualifying, is because at his time at Alpine, his qualifying stats have actually not been that strong, especially compared to his time at Toro Rosso, AlphaTauri, and there's been enough races where he's clearly underperforming the potential of the car. I'm looking at races like Miami, Canada, for example, where Colapinto performed very strongly in qualifying and Gasly was quite a ways behind him. And even last year that happened, and of course during his time up against Ocon at Alpine. So the historical qualifying data suggests that Gasly just is leaving too much time on the table in some races, and so that's why his quality rating actually ends up looking lower. Race rating, though, looks pretty good, positive 0.216, which ranks 9th, so top 10 driver in race performance. Points above expected, also pretty good for Gasly, positive 4.713%, which ranks 7th based on percentile score. So for Gasly, he's performing pretty well. He's in all likelihood going to be at Alpine again for 2027. I believe he has a contract for 2027 with the team. That being said, the identity of his teammate is something that's yet to be decided. And with Alpine's uptick in form compared to last year, this is a team that will look a little bit more promising than did last season. Now looking at the other side of the garage and looking at Franco Colapinto. For Colapinto, not so strong. Quality rating positive 0.284, ranks 19th, so he's been one of the weaker qualifiers of the season, but the quality rating is a little bit better than last year. Race rating, not great, negative 0.914, which ranks dead last, so his race performances have been ranked dead last amongst the entire grid, even worse than drivers like Stroll, Lindblad, who I think you could objectively say have been a little bit worse in terms of Grand Prix performances. Points above expected, also not great, negative 8.3 or 70%, but ranks 16th on the percentile score. And part of the reason why that is because you have the two Cadillac drivers in Stroll, who I believe are below him, just because of how the numbers played out, and also because this team has generally been towards the front of the grid. Having a -8 is not as bad as if you were at the very bottom of the midfield. So that's kind of how it works out, and I do think he's perhaps gone a little bit lucky with how he's gotten his points. I believe he had the 6th place finish, or 6th and a 7th, and those two races out of 11 account for the majority of his points, whereas the modified points system that I use for the race rating does it a little bit more fairly compared to the very top-heavy F1 point system. So it's easier to have a very good points above expected if you have a couple really, really strong results that really boost your points total. But then race rating looks at all the races together a little bit more equally, a little bit more equal weight between them. And so that's why I think there's a bit of a discrepancy there for Colapinto between points above expected and for race rating, just in terms of his rank on the grid. That being said, for Colapinto, while he has improved compared to 2025, I do think he's one of the weaker drivers on the F1 grid, and I do think at this point in time he is at a little bit of a risk of being dropped for another driver, whether that's a rookie or another experienced driver on the grid who is switching teams and joining Alpine. We don't really know who that's going to be yet, or if Colapinto is going to stay for another year, but these are storylines that are going to develop and hope will have a conclusion in the fall. So that's all for this video, analyzing Alpine in the first half of their 2026 F1 season and their drivers as well. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.